Welcome back to A Bit of Curiosity. I'm your host, Jeremy Howlett. I'm excited today to have Richie Norton on here. Um, just to give Richie a quick bio here, Richie was born and raised in San Diego before moving to Brazil and then to Hawaii. He's happily married to his wife, Natalie. They have 4 boys, one son who already has made it his way to heaven, and they have cared for 3 beloved foster children in addition. He's an award-winning author of several books, a serial entrepreneur, and an executive coach to CEOs, and I can't list all of his features, but he's been featured everywhere. So we can post some of that in the show notes. But Richie, I'm so excited to get some time to talk with you today, man. Thanks for coming on.
Yeah, thanks, Jeremy. I'm excited to be here too. This is going to be a lot of fun. I've been looking forward to it. It's going to be a good time.
Yeah, to preface this, maybe we should tell everybody Richie didn't want to come on until I was serious. He's like, have 10 episodes out there and then we'll chat. So
It's true.
so we've got 10 out there now, and so here Richie's on, and we're
And
excited to
then you
have him.
message
So.
and you're like, I hit 10. I'm like, let's do it. Let's do it right now. Right now. And you're like, no,
Yeah,
wait, we have to wait a couple of days.
he was ready. He was ready. I wasn't quite ready. I was like, no, wait, let's do this on Monday. So here we are a couple days later. So Richie, like, we just kind of talk about anything and everything on this podcast. But I'd really like to kind of jump into, like, you are like one of the most free people that a lot of people know, and kind of talk to us about like how you've designed your life to be free, and then we can kind of get into why you do that. But how have you designed your life to be able to be free and do the things that you do?
Every time I think of a new project that I want to do, because I'm excited about making stuff up and being creative, instead of telling myself I can't because, I ask myself if I actually really want to do it or not. Because usually the reason in my head that I wouldn't want to do it is not, like most people, because of the resources. Not that I have the resources, but I feel like they can be found once you decide what you're going to do. I really believe that once you decide who you want to be, you'll know what to do. So for me, the main constraint is time. So I'm afraid that if I choose, actually, I'm not afraid. I know that if I choose one thing, it comes with a long list of other things that I may be aware of or I may not be aware of. So to answer your question, I ask myself a better question. I believe you ask a better question, you get a better answer. So I'm always trying to ask myself better and better questions. So I say, how can I do this in a way that will increase my time?
Yeah, I love
How
that.
can I do this in a way that will increase my availability? How can I do this in a way that will increase my autonomy? How can I do this in a way, even if I'm personally not able, how can I get the results that I'm wanting to get? Instead of asking myself or telling myself I can't do it because XYZ. And the sad part of it is that most people go like this. I want to have more free time. Therefore, I'm going to start this thing to get it. But they lose all of their free time to the thing. Oh, I want to be an entrepreneur so I can have time with my family, but they lose their family to the business. That makes me angry a little bit because you intentionally did the wrong thing. Like you can't sacrifice what you love for success, because when you sacrifice what you love for success, you get neither. How you spend your time is how you show your love. So I believe in time, Time. Today is my everything. So the better question is, how can I do this in a way that will increase my availability, my freedom of time, not decrease it? And one more thing on that. People go, that's impossible. You can't do that. And I'll say, no, that's because you're optimizing for this dream or this cash flow based on means, not ends. If you optimize for available time, you will run the dream business differently. You'll be an architect. Architects don't build buildings, they draw them. You'll be the general contractor. General contractors don't even pick up a freaking hammer unless they want to. They sub the whole thing out. That doesn't mean you don't do certain things. It's not about the value of hard work. What I'm saying is you choose what parts you want to do. And if there are parts that you don't want to do, instead of losing yourself to that thing you don't want to do, you actually become innovative and creative in finding ways to do it that are different, that actually propel your dream forward, like a castle in a moat. You have the castle in the middle and the moat out here. The moat protects the castle from bad things getting in. Most people do the opposite. They set their dreams at the end of a timeline and they work really, 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 really hard to get it, and then they usually don't. And that's because they got stuck in the moat. But if you say, I'm going to do this thing, and this is the life I want to live, and my work supports it, instead of leading endlessly toward it, it's called time tipping, man. Anti-time management.
Love it. I love it. So in that, right, like you hit on a really key point that I think a lot of people struggle with. Like I think one of the biggest struggles that people have is defining what they truly want. Because like you mentioned success a couple of times, right? Like how do we truly define success?
You ask yourself, what's the goal of the goal?
Define that. What do you mean?
I could reverse this, start interviewing you, but I won't do that yet. Okay.
Hey, I'm game. I'm game.
I
We can go that direction.
fine. You don't need to get deep here. Okay. Just for a second. Just first thing comes to mind. Like, what's a goal of yours?
To write a book.
Okay. What will happen if you write that book and it works? It's successful.
I'd probably end up with speaking opportunities. People would buy my book. I'd have a little more cash flow. But to me personally, I'd feel like, okay, I benefited people because they bought my book. There's
Okay.
value in it.
So we keep going this whole line of thinking, but let me say it this way. The first answer you said was speaking gigs. And I would say, if the purpose of the book is speaking gigs, you don't need a book. You can do speaking
Sure.
gigs. If you say the purpose of speaking gigs is that people hear me and buy my book so that I influence them, you don't need a book or speaking gigs to influence people. You can do what you're doing right now. So once you understand that, everything starts changing. It doesn't mean you don't do a book and speaking gigs.
Right.
It means that the thing you really want to do, you put that central instead of at the end. And that changes the way you operate, which gives you the time and the influence and the kudos that you want from the start, not the end.
Yeah, for sure.
You bake in your values from the start, like baking a cake. If you bake a cake without sugar, you can't expect it to be sweet unless you're doing keto and putting in that monk fruit thing or whatever it is. You know what I'm saying? But like whatever they do there, stevia stuff. But like, value your time. Don't time your values.
No, I love that, right? Like, and I think like that time is really all we have at the end of the day, right? Like it's our most important resource. And you talk a lot about that in your book, Anti-Time Management, right? Like you share the story of losing your son, which was obviously a very hard thing, right? Like walk us through that a little bit. Walk us through that experience and kind of what woke you up to where you are today.
Before my son passed away, my brother-in-law actually passed away. He was living on and off with us for a number of years, and he died in his sleep at the age of 21. And when that happened, it totally, I mean, in addition to all the sad things, right? All the remorse, all the guilt, all the worries, all the grief. It was also like, oh, whoa, like he didn't get to live to be 65, fat, rich, and retired like the
Yeah.
American dream.
Yeah.
The American dream is, at least it used to be born, go to school, get married, work for 45 years, retire. They forget to tell you this part that you'll only probably live for 5 to 7 years longer on average. The average person dies in their mid 70s, more or less. They forget to tell you
Right.
that part. And that's the American dream.
Yeah.
And so when that American dream was, I'm like, he did live a great life. He's a great person, served people, did all the things. Like he's a great example to me. And then it ended. So when I thought the shortness of life was more real than I imagined, I get that life is also quote unquote long for other reasons, but it really woke me up. And my to thinking I need to do things now, not later. And I kind of had that idea in my mind already. So I lived in Brazil. I was a missionary there. I saw a lot of people in poverty in the favelas, and I thought, how can I help people work their way out of poverty? And I thought, it's not that they're not talented; they have all the talent in the world. It's that maybe they don't have the resources, right?
Yeah.
Or the know-how or the connections, the network, whatever it is. I mean, it's the same for everybody, but in abject poverty, it is definitely a different situation. And I went to school at BYU Hawaii. I was student body president there, and I saw and talked to all these students who were doing good stuff. And the president of the university at the time asked me to ask students what their plans were after, and if they were going to go home to their home countries, and because part of the mission was funding to be leaders there and do all these kind of things. And a lot of them would say, no, I'm going to stay in America. I mean, I get it. America's awesome, right? Like, love it. But what was interesting is they said, I don't actually want to be in America. I actually want to be home with my family. And I remember one person specifically telling me, I'm not trying to overgeneralize, I'm just being extremely specific. One person said, Yeah, my brother's driving taxis in Canada. He would much rather be home with his family
Yeah.
doing something else. No judgment. That was what they told me. So I thought, what if there is a way to become self-reliant through self-employment? Why are we always just pushing towards getting jobs? I like jobs. Jobs are great. We all need jobs. Most people have jobs. But they didn't want to go back because they were going home to places where there are no jobs.
Yeah.
And so I started a Center for Entrepreneurship. That's another whole long story. I helped start and fund businesses in Mongolia, Cashmere Company, and several other companies across the Asia Pacific Rim. I did not know what I was doing. I did not have any money. It was the fact that I wanted to do this, and that I was able to gather other people who did have this knowledge, this know-how, these resources to make it happen. And I think that's what people forget, is they forget that they are capable of gathering. That's
Yeah.
what strategy is. Strategy has nothing to do with the resources. If you're basing your strategy based on your resources, that's just basically focusing on means, not ends. Strategy is, I'm going to get here regardless of what means we have. Therefore, I'm going to figure something out. There's a
Yeah.
very
No.
strict difference between strategy in the head and tactics in the hands, right? But the reason I did this so early, I had a professor say, "Why are we teaching people how to get jobs when they should be being taught how to create jobs? They have a bachelor's degree. What are we talking about?" Right? No one
Yeah.
thinks this way. It's actually become way more prevalent and popular because of social media over the last 20 years. But before, it was like only randos did this stuff. Anyways,
Yeah, you're
I
crazy like
started.
Steve Jobs or whatever, right? Like if you
Sure,
were
yeah,
if you were an
it's
entrepreneur, right?
different
Like
type of thinking, and at the same time, and I think what's crazy about entrepreneurship. Side note is, I think the majority of the world is forced to be entrepreneurs because they live on less than a few dollars a day. People
yeah.
forget that part too. Like, anyways. So instead of waiting until I was 65, fat, and retired to do this thing, I said, why not now? And the first thought was, how do I feed my family doing this? So I had to figure that part out. And so on and so forth. During this process, my fourth son caught pertussis, or whooping cough, and he passed away. And we named him Gavin after my brother-in-law, Gavin, who had passed away. I remember in the hospital, a nurse saying, "You should stay the night." My wife and I are like, we always stay the night. But what she was really doing was cueing us in on the fact that she didn't think he was going to make it. And I remember just my wife rocking him, and I have my hand on his little heart and just waiting for those last beats. And when he passed away, we walked out of that hospital empty-handed, and it was the heaviest thing we've ever felt in our lives.
Imagine.
And we called it Gavin's Law. So yeah, my brother-in-law's name was Gavin, my son's name was Gavin. And so here's the idea around this starting thing. It's Gavin's Law. So if you're listening, write this down. It's live to start, start to live. Because if you live to start those ideas that are pressing on your mind, you really will start living, even if it doesn't work out. There's a reason something's pressing on your mind. Even if it fails and it moves you forwards or backwards, the fact that you get it off your plate helps you know what you're doing, how to learn, what you should do moving forward. So you experiment with one thing, and if it works, move forward. If it doesn't, move on or pivot. And I've done this process over and over and over and taught people this as well. This isn't something crazy and unique, but here's the acronym for START that I created. It's serve, think, ask, receive, and trust. START. Serve, think, ask, receive, and trust. But when you start by serving others and you thank them for the privilege and opportunity to serve them, and you earn the right to ask for help where needed, and you're open to receiving the same way a quarterback would throw it to a receiver if the receiver puts a knee down or drops the ball on purpose, that would be silly. You have an entire team. The goal of receiving is to bring it to the end zone, to score, to win.
Right.
And then you trust. And I don't necessarily mean trust that process, because the process could be flawed if it's not based on purpose. Process follows purpose. So if you're doing something on purpose, the process will work because it's in alignment with what you want. If you're following a process that is someone else's purpose or is broken, that is how, bringing it full circle to what we were talking about earlier, you start to get really frustrated because you're doing
Yeah.
all the right things, and as Covey said, on the wrong wall.
Yeah, I think like
The wrong
yeah,
wall.
there's I love that acronym, right? Like, and I think like it's so important too, right? Like, we can go serve people, but if our ulterior motive is just to get something out of them, you're skipping the thank part, right? Like, you're skipping the true gratitude part. And but if you go out to serve just to serve and to be grateful for the opportunity to serve, then people are willing to give, right? Like,
I
and
totally agree. And I'm glad you brought that up because I don't want anyone to mistake and think that this is some sort of weird, I scratch your back, you scratch mine. I'm not a huge fan of this intentional reciprocal like trickery. It is literally genuine. I will serve you whether I get something out of this or not. It's very transformational and non-transactional.
yeah, and I think like that's so important to be non-transaction, right? Like we live in a very transactional society, and I think that's in a lot of ways that's detrimental to what we truly can become, right? Like going back to defining success, really, right? Like, and I love the START acronym because I think that builds into, okay, as I look at what do I really want, right? Like, what is success? Is success just a fat bank account? Is it increased cash flow? Like, is that truly success? And I think you'd probably answer no, right? Like in my life, no. Like, I can have all the money in my bank account. That's not going to give me the time with my family. That's not going to give me the experiences, right? Like, we've been lucky to take our kids to all 50 states, and I wouldn't trade
Wow,
that for yeah, I wouldn't trade that for a buttload of money, right? Like,
that's awesome.
yeah, it's been a phenomenal adventure. It's been a phenomenal experience, and I wouldn't trade that for anything because to your point, what you talk about so much, right? Like, is that like life is short, right? Like, we don't know when we're gonna go. We don't know when one of our children are gonna go. As unfortunate as that can be, right? Like,
Yeah, and I don't know when it started. It might have started with, in kindergarten, but we do these weird trade-offs where we set again with time management. You say like, if you do these 10 steps, then you'll get this thing, and then you're like, but what? Why couldn't I just do the thing? And the answer is you can. And the teacher was just trying to do that to waste time. Honestly.
absolutely. No, I always struggled with busy work in school. It was all like it was
so,
frustrating, right? Like,
so it's a
cuz
really hard thing to realize that money and meaning can go together. You and I both know very wealthy people who have all the money in the world in no time. There's nothing more sad than a famous rich person who is tragically depressed with their life. And I'm not talking about clinically necessarily. I'm just saying it's a sad thing. You have it
yeah,
all. And then and then there's also people that sacrifice all the money for meaning, and they start getting into now they have to look for handouts, and now they have to fundraise, and now they're spending more time trying to raise money than they are helping the people. It's called mission creep, right? Like it's a whole thing. So money and meaning can go together, and I think that's the point. Like, for example, after my brother-in-law passed away and my son passed away, and our foster kids came and went, which is another tragic thing. Like, it hurts more in some ways because in death there's a finality, and I believe I will see them again.
yeah,
Whereas when foster kids come and go, and they're still around, fortunately, but you don't know how they're being treated. It's like a living nightmare every single day.
yeah, oh,
I'm
yeah,
praying, hoping. But after they left, my wife had a stroke, lost her memory. She got it back. She's okay now. My son got hit by a car crossing the street. He should be dead. I remember just asking, like, does God hate me? Like what's going on, And then I realized I had this kind of epiphany, like, no, this is my revelation. Like, love God unconditionally. I don't think God necessarily did all these things to me or to my family or to these people. I think they happen. They're not necessarily all strung together, except for by maybe, our connections to these things. And that helped me realize I can do everything I can in my power to move forward without blaming God to keep my faith, which allowed me to learn that the important thing about finding meaning isn't finding it at all. It's assigning positive meaning to the things that are happening. When you assign positive meaning, you make things better, not bitter. You get better, not bitter. No matter what happens, especially under anti-time management and time tipping, this whole concept in the book, what you realize is whether the thing works out or not, you win because you actually put your priorities first, not last. Most people put their priorities literally last. Literally, you put out a timeline, it is last. It is the weirdest, strangest phenomenon that happened. It actually started about 200 years ago with a guy named Frederick Taylor who invented time management. So if we can move on and stop saying that time management has anything to do with personal development, we'll be really good. because that has nothing to do with personal development. It's about squeezing every drop of blood, sweat, and tears out of workers on the factory floor. And somehow we've morphed into something that it's not. And that's why we wonder why we're doing all these great things and have no time. Well, you're measuring for the wrong things. You gotta stop managing time and start prioritizing attention.
Yeah, I love how you talk about that, right? Like prioritizing attention, and I think that's so important because like you still have a schedule, right? Like you're still scheduling things out in your day to some degree, right? Like do you time block? Is that something that you do?
You're asking the right questions, and I might be embarrassed to answer this. No, my calendar is completely open. I believe that an empty calendar is a full life, and a full calendar is an empty life. I do understand time blocking. I do understand batching. I do understand there are times and places. I just believe that leadership is an empty calendar because leaders shouldn't be doing all these weird things all day long. They should be
Sure.
focusing on the vision and solving the problems that the people they've hired can't get done. You can't do that if you have a full calendar. This is why leaders pretend they're leaders, but they're actually just managers. Like, oh, it's just, let's do that. What are you talking about? Leaders need to set a new vision, take it to a new spot. You can't do that when your calendar is full. That said, it's because in leadership, an empty calendar means it's handled. It means you set yourself up for success, and you empower the people or whatever it is, the systems, to get it done. So I focus on projects. So I have like a big goal, dream, the goal of the goal. I have all these kind
Yeah.
of things in mind, and then I work towards them in the most. I'm not going to say it's the most effective or efficient because it may or may not be, but I do it based on when I want to, meaning when I'm
Sure.
available. And yes, the reason I say this is because deadlines are very helpful, which are different than timelines, by the way. Very different than timelines, even though they're on the same line. I get it. But what I've learned is this: if I have less time to get something done, I get more done in less time. That's where innovation comes from. No one is more. This one will resonate. No one's more productive than a procrastinator with an impending deadline.
Oh yeah.
You move mountains. So I will have something out there in mind, and yes, I will go backwards from like the end of the end. What Aristotle called it, final cause. I'll go way out, and then I'll go back and set things in motion. Entrepreneurs, leaders, managers. It just depends on what your role is and what you want to do, but your job is to set things in motion, not do everything yourself. So if something has to get done and I am the only one that can do it, it is generally because I like and want to do it. Most people have career transitions because they hate what they're good at. They're done with it. They're sick of it.
Yeah.
And this is also what gets them stuck. I can't start this new thing. I can't do this new thing because I'm really good at Excel. Good luck being a bricklayer the rest of your life. That's your choice. Your choice. Like, so when you think about what you like and want to do versus what you're talented or have chosen and learned at, you make different decisions. This doesn't mean you do things wrongly or badly. It does mean, yes, you can learn, but it also means you learn how to be a leader and you actually focus on getting the results. Let me say it this way: work on results, not means. Delegate results, not means. Covey said, begin with the end in mind. I was, mentored by the Covey people, but
Yeah.
he never said begin with means in mind. Never once.
Sure.
People choose habits, and they choose the freaking wrong habits that have nothing to do with the thing they want to achieve. Once you decide who you want to be, you'll know what to do because the habits then they can move, they can change. The means can change based on the outcome of the outcome. And I say outcome the outcome because most people will say, I'm going to start this business to make money. And I'll say, why do you want to make money? Oh, because I want free time. Okay, let's start with free time then. What do you mean? We're going to set your business up so you have free time and all these things happen to support you. Because if you don't, you cement a system in place that you'll never get out of. And that is a fact. Anyone who's been there knows. They know it. That's why they hire people like me and you to come in and say, so you're doing all these things and you want this? Those don't align. What are you talking about?
Yeah.
It is the challenge of the century.
No, absolutely, right? Like and it goes like purpose is so key to that, but then setting up the pieces and putting the pieces right. Like I'm reading the one thing right now with Get from Gary Keller, right? Like, and he uses the analogy of dominoes, right? And he talks about how you can take a 2-inch domino and that can knock down another domino that's 50% larger than it and then 50% larger than that one and on, right? So
That's cool.
50, like 57 dominoes down the line is the distance between the earth and the moon, right? And that's all it takes, right? And he talks about, okay, all you got to do is what's the one thing that you can do today to set yourself up for success in that thing, right? That's going to make everything else easier, right?
Yes.
And it goes back to what you said, right? It's about asking the right questions. So often we hit our day and we're like, oh, what are the things that I need to do today, right? Like, what's on my to-do list? And then we draw out a to-do list that's like 20 things long and we say, okay, I got to get through all of these things today. And then we get to the end of the day and we've maybe got 3 of them done, but the most important ones didn't even get touched because we didn't have time for them because we were stuck in the weeds with all the other distractions, right?
That's
Like,
right.
and I think
So
that's so important to what you said, right? Like having this free calendar allows you to get more done.
it's true. And people don't like it when I talk about that because they're obsessed with calendars. And I'm not anti-calendar. I just want many people to recognize if you look on your calendar, what actually is essential on there. One, what actually moves the needle. Two, and is anything on there that actually helps you experience the joy of what you're working towards. If your calendar is full with all the experiences of joy you're working towards right now, then all the work will be filled in as like the little things. This is a mental thing, but ironically, they all still get done. Like, whoa, it's crazy, you know. Like
Yeah, well,
this is why. If somebody, let's be real, if somebody sits down and just grinds all day long and they never take a break, they're gonna kill it, and that would be great. And sometimes that happens during these block of time of working and that kind of stuff like that. But for the most part, people work based on how they're measured. So it's going to be, this isn't for everybody, but let's say it's going to be a 9 to 5, and what they got done by 5 could have been done by 9:05. But instead, they met with Bob and Sarah, Billy. They turned off the lights in their office to make it look like they were doing something really important, but they were just playing solitaire. Like this is facts.
these are facts, right? Like, but
What are
that's
you
so much
doing?
of that's corporate culture too, right? Like,
Disgusting.
modern corporate culture is about butts in seats, right? Like, we're seeing this like back to work movement, right? Like back to the office, and because companies don't think that people are as effective at home, that's not it. It's because the boss has lost power. He wants
Yeah.
power because now he can't look over your shoulder and make sure that you're in your seat doing your work.
I agree. That is definitely a piece of the puzzle. And also they're bored. I worked my whole life to be this manager guy, and nobody's here.
There's yeah.
What? Like,
It's about power, right? Like it's
and and then
like
people will go like, oh, but there's Elon Musk and all these big companies are making everyone come back to work and be in the office or. But there are certain types of work and certain things that has to be done. And they say, what do you do about that? And I say, you don't do anything about that. A corporation is going to do what a corporation is going to do. Choose a corporation you want to work with or work on your own.
yeah.
Because most of these corporations are actually the flip side of that, especially with Gen Z now. It used to be all about millennials, but now millennials are running the world. So now it's about Gen Z. So they're like, what? They don't want to work here. They're so lazy. And you go, you mean they have options, and you guys have built tools for them to be able to do whatever they want, whenever they want, wherever they want, and they have more opportunities than ever. That's the problem. Yeah. That's the real problem. That doesn't sound like a problem to me, man. So the companies that shift to help people use the modern technology, they will gain the talent because that talent knows they can do it from a boat or a mountain or their house or an office. Versus the ones that have to come to an office. Again, it's not a right or wrong. You have to remember it's your choice. When you
Right.
like, like when you choose one thing, you also choose another. See, it bothers me when people complain that they don't have time because I'm like, that was a choice. No, it wasn't a choice. It's the domino thing you just talked about. Yeah, it was a choice. You can choose another one.
Yeah. And it might take a little bit of time, and sacrificing some of the time of other things that you want to go create the dominoes and line them up to have other choices, right? Like, but ultimately it does, right? It comes down to what do we choose, right? What do we truly want? And I think, like, again, defining what we desire, what we want, tends to be some of the hardest things for people, because if we were to bring 100 people on here, Richie, right, and we were asking them what do they want, how many of them do you think would really be able to answer that question without
Yeah.
just saying I want a bigger bank account, or like, what do you
Yeah.
truly want, right?
I want to go along with that Lego analogy using just for a second. One of the problems that we're facing right now. Now, remember, we are a quarter century into the 2000s. Is that the third millennium? Something like that, right? It's 20. I know it's 2024, but it's 20. It is basically 25 years into the year 2000.
Yeah.
And we like to look at our history by hundreds, right? And
Yep.
we're still using 19th and 18th century thinking tools, system, which were learned by the 20th century leaders and managers to try and help people who were 25 years old potentially live in a world that doesn't exist that anymore. Come on.
Yeah, it's fascinating. No, it's fascinating.
With the dominoes thing, like, it used to be, you're right, when you choose one choice, all these things happen, they stack up for better or for worse. But no one actually knew before. I know it takes time. I know, but things can go faster than others. But before, there wasn't, just to kind of let people off the hook, there wasn't this other choice. It didn't exist, this
Yeah.
technology. So now that you're in the middle and it's more about being aware, you can choose another path. And then once you're aware, that's where you're coming in, where you're saying, I don't know what to do anymore. Because with more choices, it's actually harder to pick. If you only have one, you're done. If you have two, if you think about it, three or more, you start to get confused, right?
Yep.
Unless they price it differently, like at McDonald's, then you're good to go. You know, big, medium, or small. Do you want me to answer your question about how to find out what you want?
Yeah, let's talk about it.
Remember the question, what's the goal of the goal? Because if you start from what you really want, you'll realize there's a lot of ways to get there. I actually met a person, not too old, but sort of older. Yeah, she was a corporate person, and she was basically semi-retired. And she's telling me all this money she still needs to make. And I go, what do you want to do? She's like, I just want to play with my kids on my grandkids on the beach. You know, that's free, right? That's about time. That's free. And so most people don't realize that the thing they actually want is free. Once you realize the thing you actually want is free, everything changes.
Yeah.
I mean, why do you want a nice big house with people like, yeah, that costs money? Oh, because I want, like, a family around and I want to host people. You can also do that at a park, man. Like, when you start really thinking about it, the things that are most important in life cost $0. So that's why I say you can start from the center. Now, if you really want to know what you want, what I do is I say to people, I have them usually take a piece of paper out and have them fold it in four. And I say, where do you want to be in 2 years? What would make you feel happy? What would be a great thing to happen? And they'll list, I call it the 4 P's of productivity: personal, professional, people, and play is what I call it. And then I'll list, there could be like 10 on each. Now there's 40 things. And then I'll say, if you could only choose one out of each quadrant, which would it be? And it's a really hard decision. But once they decide and they narrow it down to 4 things, then I go, what are the chances that if you did one of those 4 things, or those 4 things only, that all the other things would also happen? And it's the first time they've ever actually written down everything they want in their life on one sheet of paper, ever. And it's also, and very simple. And it's also the first time they've actually seen it narrowed down to like 4 things, which is like a North Star. And all of a sudden they start optimizing their life around those things and start making choices around those things. So when someone says, do you want to do this or do you want to do that? They can look at it and they can go, does it lead me closer to my goal or not? Because that goal is aligned with the purpose of who you want to be in 2 years. So it goes purpose. This is kind of the anti-time management framework. It goes purpose, priorities. Most people put priorities last. In this way, priorities are attached to purpose first. Then it becomes projects, because you're turning these things into actual, instead of saying, I want to be an author, it's I am an author. I have a writing project. I have a book I'm working on. Then it becomes payments. Not that you can't get paid first, but you decide how to get paid based on the lifestyle you want to live. Not choose to get paid and by default have a lifestyle that you hate. which is the majority.
Yeah.
If I
No,
if I want if I want to move to New York, why am I still in California? If you don't want to go to New York and be some kind of analyst guy or a financial guy, you really just want to be in Montana fishing. You know that in 2024, you can be an analyst financial guy on the internet, right? Like, so so where you live determines more about your lifestyle than anything else.
yeah, absolutely.
And it just the environment essentially. But then once you have payments to set up, then you can be prolific. I call it having prolifics. And at that point, you can kind of like do all kinds of things and project stack and bring them together. I'm getting too deep on this, but if someone asks who they want to be in 2 years, they can start using the system I shared and help them figure out what to do, and it can change. I usually do this on Sundays or every once in a while, and it really does change almost everything about my trajectory.
I love it. If you're listening to this, I'd pause it right now and go take a piece of paper, fold it in four, and write out your quadrants. Write out what you truly want, define it. I think, Richie, that's phenomenal, right? Like I think we have such a hard time because we get stuck in the mire so much, right? Like it's all about, okay, what do I got to do today? What's next on the to-do list? Like what am I like I'm bogged down by all of these things that I forget my purpose, my priorities, right? Like you said, those things end up becoming last because it's all about, okay, how am I getting paid, right? That ends up taking
Yeah,
priority over everything else that
and
really should be a priority.
yeah, I understand that for many people listening to this may be a different way of thinking, and it sounds really hard, and maybe it is. But the reason I think this way, yes, because of the tragedies I've experienced in the shortness of time, but also because I wrote another book called The Power of Starting Something Stupid. And when I wrote it, these books are in all these kind of languages now. It's so cool. But
It's awesome. I saw you were in chat, like
yeah,
doing signatures for
all these
China
people, I
distribution, right? Like that's
get
awesome.
1,000 people, sometimes 10,000, 20,000 people on like a podcast like this. And I'm just like answering questions as a translator. It's really cool, man. I But anyways, um, so I interviewed over 300 people that were in retirement or approaching retirement because I was obsessed with this idea when I was younger and in college about this work-life balance. So I would ask rich people, I specifically would ask them, do you have work-life balance? And the answer was always no, and that it was a myth. And I actually agree.
Yeah.
But the challenge is they always chose work over family while professing to put family first. That kind of made me a little mad. They're not congruent.
Yeah.
And so I thought, well, can you flip that? Because a balanced ball doesn't move unless there is a force that moves it. So you don't actually want balance because balance means stagnant.
Right.
Balance means it's not moving.
Well, and to your point, I think it's impossible to achieve balance, right? Like it because and David A. Bednar talks about this. Like you can't be doing two things at the exact same time. If you're working, you can't be prioritizing your family. If
Sure,
you're prioritizing your family, you can't be working, right? Like
sure,
it's impossible to have true
right.
balance.
So the goal then, if you're trying to push a basketball, let's keep using that analogy, into a hoop, you actually have to you have to push it in that
Mhm.
direction. And so it really is your choice. If you say I'm working for my family and you never see your family, you're doing it wrong or you're lying to yourself. Oh, I have to. I'm not saying whether you have to or don't have to. I'm just saying the goal you said you wanted is not happening and you're doing it on purpose. It's not family first, it's work comes second. So anyone that says family first is usually lying. It is something to soothe their mind. The fact that they're not putting family first.
Yeah.
And anyone who says that's not true, I would say, I love that you are one of the few that are actually living that. That's what I would say. So I would interview these people, and they would say I waited for a time where I would have more time, more education, more experience, and more money, only to find out that when I got here, I still need more time, more education, more experience, and more money. I was like, that's not going to be me. And I worked in venture capital. I worked in social entrepreneurship. I worked in all kinds of different things before some of the things I'm doing now. But it was just fascinating to me when I would go talk to some of these very rich people, some of them billionaires, and I'm not exaggerating, and they would say literally under their breath, and I'm listening because I'm there and I'm talking to them, and they go,
Yeah.
I go, who was that guy that came in with you? And they go, oh, it's so and so. He wanted my time. And I go, and he'd say, this is a very well known venture capitalist. And he said, time is. He said, money is easy, time is hard. And I met with like some of these guys, investment banker dudes, and they're like fully regretting their lives, saying, at the time in my mid-20s, and they're like, I wish I could go back to the time I've been working my whole life to be back where you are right now. Huh. And I'm not, so again, money and meaning can go together, but most people have been taught by the man to put money first and deceive them by saying you're putting your family first by putting money first. It's not true. It has never been true. It never will be true. And the fact that we're talking about this means you can make a different choice, just you were unaware. So
Yeah.
these are important topics. People can get angry about them. The reason they can be angry about them is because it hurts. It hurts really bad to hear this stuff.
No, it is hard language because so many of us have been we're pursuing something, right? We're in the trenches, we're doing something because we're trying to provide for our family, doing what we feel like that's what we're supposed to
Yeah,
do. And
yeah.
so
And I'm
that's
not saying, again, I'm not judging. I'm also not saying right or wrong. I'm saying you choose. So a lot of my clients are big YouTuber people and they want their time back. So I have a business that helps them get their time back through editing services and strategy and consulting and all these kinds of things. And what was amazing to me is we get 80% of their time back. And I'm not exaggerating again, it literally was that whole Pareto principle, kind of 80-20 thing. And you know what they would do to fill up their time? I thought they would fill it up with more family time. They just filled it up with more videos and more work. Again, not a judgment. Anti-time
right.
management can be way more productive and also less, like have less time for the things. But that's what I'm talking about. It's more just about not lying to yourself. Like it really is a choice. If you want that, who am I to judge that? That's what you
Sure.
want. And so there's a lot of ways to think through this and do this. Um, Let me give you one quick example. Let me say this first. Doing this work, people ask me for help. So I wrote I wrote The Power of Starting Something Stupid, which blew up. Brene Brown said it changed her and her husband's life. She wrote a whole blog post about it. It blew up the book. It became, in the top 100 of all books on Amazon at the time. And people started reaching out for help. So I'd help them start their stupid ideas, and I'd teach them how to do it in a way, to live their dreams and do this. But many of them would say, I started this thing, I'm making money, it's working, but I don't have any time, which was not the purpose. So I'd say, oh, I guess I'd write this book called Anti-Time Management to help you do it in a way, to get your time back. Over this time period, I started a company called Product to help people make the products and ideas they wanted to create. Now we make over 100 different products. We started out with like bamboo creasers for like sewing or knitting
Yeah.
or something. I don't even know what they do. And doing transformers, which are electrical equipment to be put in places where they're doing AI and Bitcoin mining. Like the whole domino thing, right? So the sooner you can start, the better. Just do it on purpose and do it around your values. Not and
Yeah.
don't often think that your values are going to come into play later, because they won't. And if you put your values in from the start, you'll work better. In fact, when I work with founders, I will ask them, because venture capitalists, they really want the projects to work, but majority of them don't. And I'll say to them, you guys say you're here to change the world, but we both know you're here to sell this company or to go public or something. No, we want to be in this forever. Right? Whatever, man. If it were to sell, what would you do? And they say a number of things they would do. And I say, well, why aren't you doing that now? Oh, because we have to build this thing. And then we have to go through the process of helping them learn that if they actually put that thing that they really want to do in from the start when they're building it, their business will actually be more successful, both efficiently, effectively, and profitably. You go, why? It's crazy. That makes sense. I'll tell you why. Because the bigger, better dream is the greatest threat to any business. Because they use businesses as milestones, stepping stones, and they are trashed the moment they get an opportunity to do something else. If you bring it in from the start, you don't have any of those problems anymore.
Yeah. That's That's fascinating to think about, right?
It,
Like,
no one thinks about or talks about this stuff. I'm like, just look at it. Even if
yeah,
you look at people go, I'm so objective. You're like, are you? Are you? Because that's objective.
yeah.
I mean, somebody might say it's subjective, but if they haven't experienced it, I guess you can just make anything up that you want. But seen it too many times, man.
So, okay, so you've written a few award-winning books, right? Like,
Mm-hmm.
and phenomenal, right? Like you run a business that's in the Inc. 5000, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so you obviously work hard, but you have all of this time because you've laid things out in a way that puts your purpose and your priorities first.
Mm-hmm.
And like I just want to say props to that, right? Like way to go. Having started my own stupid idea in the past, right? Like it's a lot of hard work. And but it like I was thinking about it earlier today, right? Like when we started Ultra, we worked really hard. We sacrificed some family time, but we also incorporated a lot of family time into the business. Like
Yeah,
I traveled with my son to races, and
that's what I'm talking about.
he would
There you
set up
go.
the box, right? Like and to me, like that was the thing, right? Like we already mentioned, I've been to all 50 states with my kids, right? Like we we started that journey in 2015 while we were still working with Ultra. But by that time we had been purchased, and I got some backlash from the CEO at the time. Like, why would you take a month-long trip with your family? Cuz nothing is going to break. Nothing broke. This was after the trip. Nothing broke. Like just
I
cuz my
I
butt wasn't in the seat, right? Like
I
and I chose
understand.
my family.
I
And
understand.
and I think that's so like it's so important to look at, okay, lay out that piece of paper, right? Like write down all of the things that we want in each of those four quadrants and then simplify it, right? Like what is the most important? And if we do that, right, to the domino effect, right? Like everything else, like why can't we have everything on that list if we focus on the first one first, right? Like it's first things first, right? Like big rocks, right? Like lay your big rocks in first and then you can put the
Yeah,
smaller ones and then the gravel fits. But if you do it in reverse order, the big rocks don't fit.
that's true.
So,
That what your story, that's where you shared is amazing and it's perfect. And I know anyone listening to this, I'm sure there's like, this doesn't apply to me, or how does this apply to me, or this is so hard. And I would just say, like, just start where you're at with what you have. You don't need anything else. Ironically, you don't need more time, more education, more experience, or more money. You are over prepared, my friend. And over preparedness has probably stopped you your whole life from doing the thing that you want to do. The world is changed by people who are not ready, if you haven't noticed. Like, what are we even doing? So, when you start thinking like a time tipper, when you start thinking quote unquote stupid, because stupid is the new smart, it actually allows to create a space in your mind for new things to come in. I mean, if you keep acting on what you already know or have, you're just working from the past. Of course, the thing you want in the future has nothing to do with what you know right now. You have to open up your mind, create a space for new knowledge, new ideas, new things to fill in based on the thing that you want most. And when you do that, it starts making the decision process simpler, even though it's very complex, because now you're making choices based on values, which are based on purpose, which do have deadlines. It's it's pretty cool, man. And
yeah.
someone's like, I can't. You have to be an entrepreneur to do this. Nope. Do it at your work.
Yeah,
You know that.
I think that's a myth too, right? Like you don't have to be an entrepreneur to live anti-time management, right? Like
Yep.
it might make it might require getting a different job or doing something doing some things differently, right? Like but you can still do it with a corporate 9 to 5 even though you would create it to not be a 9 to 5, right? Like
Just
but
different constraints. And what's
yeah.
actually cool is when you work on constraints, that's where creativity comes from. And because you're trying something, it's actually kind of fun to see where you bump up and where it breaks. or where you have to ask questions, or where you have to ask maybe for permission, and you realize you don't want to be in that position anymore where you have to ask for permission. Like, you kind of want to see. I'll tell you why, because a lot of people will wait years and years and years and years, maybe till retirement, or maybe just 5 or 10 years to do something, and then they'll go, "Oh, dang, this is like way harder than I thought," or they'll say it's way easier than they thought. But either way, they didn't know, and they could have just tried it years earlier. The worst is when they do something that they really have been waiting for a long time, and then they don't like it. And you're like, should have figured that out earlier, man. Hollow hope. Hollow hope.
Yeah. Hey, let me fire some rapid fire questions at you before we wrap up here. So let's try to get through these relatively quickly. But how do you respond to failure?
I just cry a little. I mean, it
Fair.
hurts. It hurts. You feel it. I think of failure the way I think of, because people go, "Oh, failure," then you learn this and that. That's the typical answer. I think of failure like grief, and I feel like you have to actually realize it's a tunnel, not a cave, and that you should feel it all the way through, so that you can come out the other side a little more wise. Maybe stronger, and do whatever's next.
I love it. I love the self-awareness there. So what frightens you?
Having to ask a boss permission to coach my son's baseball team.
True. Too true. What it, what inspires you?
One, the underdog. When I feel like someone or something is being underrated or hurt or minimized, it really activates me to go into like helper mode.
Yeah.
A little bit of competition when I see like things are happening, I want to be a part of it. But the thing that motivates me the most is living without regret. So I think, would I regret this? And if it is, I'm like, I'm gonna do it. One example would be, I really didn't want to go skydiving, but my son had just turned 18. I'd never done it before, and he really wanted to go, and he invited me, and I'm like, I just don't want to do this. But if I'm gonna die, I guess it's a good way to go. I wouldn't regret having that experience with him. So sometimes you just gotta like, swallow your pride or your fears and go for it, man.
Okay, what book are you reading right now?
Oh, I have a stack of books that I'm not reading. Does that count? Does that count?
Not if you're not reading it.
I'll tell you a book that I go back to all the time. One is called Banker to the Poor by Muhammad Yunus, and the other is Good to Great by Jim Collins. These are one is not very known, I guess, but one's very well known. These books help remind me of like what it means to make positive impact in a way that is meaningful.
Yeah. Love it. So is that the same answer then for what book have you read in the past 12 to 18 months that you'd highly recommend to others? Or is there another book that you've read recently?
A client named Ben Hardy. He's been my client for 10 years. And he reached out to me after reading one of my books, which made the Power Authority, which made him decide to become an author. He tells me over that time period, he's become very prolific and very well known. And his recent book, I like Gap in the Gain. I like 10x is easier than 2x. I like Who Not How. I happen to be featured in some of these. But he actually literally just yesterday sent me a draft of a new book he's working on, and it is excellent. I'll just say that. Look up
Okay.
Benjamin.
All right. So we gotta watch for when that one drops. Okay. Good to
When you
know.
ask that question, it's a hard question because I'm more of a browser and I read things and I'm excited. I probably write more than I read, to be honest, other than just
Yeah.
like researching things. But I also do get a lot of book proposals, so I'm like people wanting like help. So that's kind of what I'm reading. Like, I'm reading stuff that's not out, so it's a hard question to answer.
That's fair. That's fair. What's your favorite place you've traveled in the past and why?
Yeah, when you say that, it's like a flash of all the different things. But I just got back to Vietnam and China. It's so wonderful. I love where I live in Hawaii. If I had to live somewhere, I love Bali. If I had to live somewhere else, maybe I might choose Scotland. My wife and I are obsessed with Scotland. We go back frequently. There's all this Harry Potter stuff there. I don't know, man. I can't answer this. It's too good. It's too good.
There's the world is an amazing place, right? Like it is an amazing place, and if you've traveled any amount, you've experienced that, right? Like that's awesome. Richie, it's been a pleasure. Where can people find you? Where can they keep up with you?
go to richienorton.com, and if you go to richienorton.com/time, I have a free guide slash 90-day challenge to help you specifically and personally implement these things that we talked about, both through strategy and tactics. Again, strategy is in the head, which we talked about a lot. Tactics are in the hand, which we shared a few ideas. But there are many ways to make this happen. But it really just depends on who you want to be. And I would love to help you make that happen. So check me out there.
Okay, awesome. Thanks for your time today, Richie. Thanks for joining us on A Bit of
Oh,
Curiosity.
thanks, brother.
So
Love you, man. You're
appreciate
awesome.
it.
I'll see ya. Thanks.